Welcome to the press preview, a first look at what's on the front pages as they come into this. In the next half hour, we'll see what's making the headlines with the journalist and author Rachel Shabi and the political editor of the Sunday Express, Camilla Tominey. Before we do that, let's have a look at what is on the front pages. And it's the row within the Conservative Party that features heavily. The Times reporting that Theresa May is about to reshuffle her cabinet with suggestions that Boris Johnson is going to be moved from the Foreign Office. Senior Conservative Party figures are urging Mrs May to promote a new generation of Tory MPs into senior posts in order to give her a viable succession plan, according to The Observer. The Express leads with a report that Boris Johnson, Liam Fox and David Davis are all calling on Tory MPs to get behind the Prime Minister. John Major has also weighed into the row, telling Rebel MPs to back Mrs May or risk a Labour government, according to the Mail. The Telegraph reports that the Prime Minister is setting aside billions of pounds to prepare the country in case there is no Brexit deal with the EU. The Star has gone with a different story. It reports that England football bosses are sending a security team to accompany their players to the World Cup in Russia. So joined by Rachel and Camilla to dig into some of these. Welcome to you both. Where do we start? Why don't we pick the Sunday Times, eh? May plots to demote Boris in reshuffle. Camilla, if I can start with you, this is sort of saying there is a middle ground between keeping him and sacking him.
It's probably a good place to start because this is the one Sunday newspaper that Theresa May has actually spoken to this weekend. She's been in her constituency doing a few jobs there. She gave a very brief televised address yesterday, sort of trying to stress that she was keeping calm and carrying on. And it's more of the same in this interview, really. She accepts that the speech didn't go as well as it could have, but is very much digging in. The suggestion about Boris, of course, keeps on rearing its heads after he wrote the 4,000-word piece for the Daily Telegraph, outlining his own vision for Brexit. That was seen as being very undermining. And ever since then, really, the question mark has hung over her as to what she does about how do you solve a problem like Boris. On one hand, he has this massive appeal to the grassroots of the party, very, very popular when it comes to any sort of polling of Tory members. On the other hand of it, seeming very divisive among MPs, and this whole issue of undermining could perhaps be solved, it's suggested, by this compromise. So keeping him in cabinet but demoting him from Foreign Secretary seems kind of odd because on one hand there was always this sense when he was appointed that Boris was going to be there to kind of fly the flag for global Britain, as he spoke about in his conference speech, sort of be the man to kind of cheer everyone up. But from the other perspective, and this is one that you'll probably share, Rachel, there's a sense that he is renowned now for his buffoonery on the world stage, and perhaps he shouldn't be in that position after all.
No, I mean, I think he's an embarrassment and, you know, has caused offence, you know. I don't know if he's caused more offence to more countries than he hasn't. I haven't, you know, done a chart, but clearly he is a national embarrassment. And it is a problem for Theresa May. It is. She says in this piece that it isn't a binary choice between keeping Boris and sacking Boris, but it does actually seem to be that, because even if she does redistribute him, you know, give him another position in her cabinet, that's not necessarily a guarantee that he's going to stop being Boris.
And will he take that? Would he take that position, considering he is now Foreign Secretary?
Would he take it, or would he decline and therefore put himself in a better position on the outside? Because that, of course, is the dilemma for her, isn't it? She needs to not antagonise him because she wants him to be inside the tent. She wants him to own Brexit. She wants someone who's a Brexiteer to be involved in it, rather than stand on the outside of cabinet and agitate from there and say this isn't what I wanted.
Although there is an argument to say that although you describe him as a national embarrassment, he's hugely popular with great swathes of people because he's flown the flag unashamedly for post-Brexit Britain. Equally, you could also argue that in intervening when what we might have ended up with the Florence speech is a kind of ham and eggs Brexit of a 5-year transition, i.e. no Brexit, a Brexitosis, actually he stood in, not only saved Brexit, but arguably saved her prime ministership. Because if she had gone with a 5-year transition, anyone who voted for Brexit would have seen it as a gross betrayal. But
that's to miss. I mean, you're seeing it through the lens of Brexit, and I understand that you would do that. But if we could look at it just coolly as a pure negotiation tactic, that was actually really damaging, because it made it look as though there was some kind of division that the negotiating team is not a united front, and that's the last thing you want to show to your partners in that negotiation.
So it made
it just
Barnier
made her
was
look
quite
weak.
conciliatory, wasn't he? If you look quite reasonable in the eyes of the EU negotiators, actually it makes them seem very unreasonable by comparison.
But that's not the point. But that was
not
the point.
a bad
It
tactic to
made her
take.
look weak. It undermined her leadership at a time when she needed to look strong in the face of negotiations. So it was actually not a good move for Britain, for Boris to do that, even by your own terms, which I don't accept to begin with.
Could I ask you both, if we step out of the Westminster bubble here, for want of a better phrase, so your average voter, all the newspaper headlines today, this crisis that you would call it at the top of the Tory party, it's a shambles, and nothing's happening really with Brexit at the moment, with social issues and things like that, because there's this, infighting going on. So your average voter, this is just no help at all.
No, this is the bit that we're not really talking about. I mean, all these fronts, all the papers are consumed with the drama of the Tories slowly collapsing in front of our eyes, but nobody's saying, actually, this, this is less important than the fact that they're doing that while they are in government. And that is actually really dangerous for the country. I mean, we're gridlocked. Nothing's happening. Nothing's happening with Brexit at a time when things really do need to be accelerating. If we're going to get a deal, nothing's happening with any policy, nothing happening.
They've got some agreement on Northern Ireland. They're not going to have an agreement on the divorce bill until the nth hour. And equally, the stasis in the Brexit negotiations, it's a two-way street. That's also down to Barnier and others in the EU.
But are you seriously suggesting that this is okay for the country?
No, you're just suggesting that. What I'm saying is...
No, I'm saying it's not okay.
It's wrong to say that... It's wrong to say... Don't put words in my mouth. I'm not saying that at all. But equally, what's interesting in response to these stories is the polling. The polling has suggested two things, which I found staggering yesterday. First of all, Theresa May has won the sympathy vote. So more people now think that she should remain in place than after the election. I think it was 44% thought she should go then. Now it's 38%, which is less than the amount of people that think she should go, first thing. Second of all, the Tories now are on 40% of the vote. They've gone up. And Labour have come down to 42.
In another poll, though, people now see the Tories as more divided.
Of course they do. And another poll suggests that people see them divided and they have less confidence in them delivering on the Brexit talks. I'm not suggesting not, but I'm saying it's all very well to kind of whitewash what might be the public response. Lots of people saw the speech and it endeared them to her. And I know that's unbelievable.
No, I'm not even talking about that. I'm not even talking about percentage points that fluctuate in a poll. I'm talking about the country being gridlocked. We cannot do anything as long as these people are arguing while they're in government. It's a much bigger thing that I'm trying to get across than the statistics of support for them or otherwise.
Anyone feels gridlocked. And people's lives go on.
Let's talk about this in the context of your front page tomorrow, Camilla. Brexit's big three backing the PM and, Boris Johnson, Liam Fox and David Davis. Do they really fully back her?
Well, this is interesting as well, isn't it? Because obviously all of these candidates could be potential leaders of the future. We know that David Davis has, been suggested to have been on his own manoeuvres. We know the same about Boris. And indeed, Liam Fox has put himself up for the leadership in the past. Having said that, at the moment, the Brexit project and the Brexiteer backbenchers are very much backing the PM because they think that the talks will completely stall if she is removed from her post. And indeed, we've already witnessed jitters from the EU about the disastrous conference speech. What I think is interesting as well is this, again, notion that the Brexiteers are having to come and rally around her in the face of the accusation that Boris has been on manoeuvres and been involved, which he denies, by the way, in the Grant Shapps plot and all of the suggestions in the Sunday Times. You have him rallying and saying to a WhatsApp group, we need to back her, we need to do this, we need to do that. Cynics will think that that's just a ploy to bide his own time. On the other hand, there's a lot of urgency around all of these stories, and actually the Tories can play the long game. There isn't going to be another election until 2022. They can regroup, they can recalibrate and see which direction the wind travels in. Let's face it, this time last year, Labour's fortunes were much reversed and they've turned things around. So that's another thing to be wary of.
Quickly, what will Labour think about this?
I mean, Labour is... I would imagine that Labour is watching this and thinking, well, we don't actually need to do a great deal except just watch the Conservatives slowly collapse. But in fact, they are doing a great deal. in the background. They are basically preparing for government, getting themselves into a situation where they are seen as credible and also able to do it. So there's all kinds of preparations going on in the background. Not least, as I understand it, they've been approached. There are discussions with the EU. The EU want to make sure that there is continuity.
Yeah, as Brussels has briefed, because of course they would do that. It's convenient for Brussels to brief that they're in talks with Labour. Well, you can interrupt this sentence, but I think it's important that we understand that we need to have continuity in these negotiations. You want Brexit to happen, so we Labour
need
have been lacking in any continuity at all about Brexit.
But they're not.
What's Labour's position on Brexit today?
No, I'm not talking about their position. I'm talking about the country negotiating Brexit,
Rachel,
and the fact that the EU is now concerned.
Is Labour at the moment credible on Brexit?
The EU is now concerned that the people that they are negotiating with are not going to be there in a year's time. And for someone who wants Brexit to happen, I would have thought that would be a worry to you.
That Brussels is rubbing its hands together with glee at the notion of negotiating with Jeremy Corbyn doesn't surprise me.
Well, I don't think it's really helpful to, if you want it to happen, then it's probably more helpful to...
I don't think Labour are going to get us any closer to it happening.
Okay.
The good news is we've got a lot more time in the next hour to talk about Brexit, so we'll be back on that. Still to come. Apparently there is a kernel of truth in this one. Could soon be crunch time for popcorn. We'll explain in a moment. Welcome back. You're watching the press preview. Still with us, Rachel Shabi and Camilla Tominey. Now, Camilla, you have an exclusive in your newspaper, the Sunday Express, Prince William and the mental health campaign.
I feel bad that it says exclusive because I think all of the Sundays have got this, or at least some of the Sundays have got this story. This was based on a meeting we all had at Imperial College yesterday. And basically, the Heads Together campaign, which you'll all remember because it was very high profile. It culminated in the Mind Over Marathon. And it was when Prince Harry talked quite movingly about the effect of his mother's death on his life. And there was a huge campaign basically to raise the issue of mental health and have people start a conversation about it. And what Imperial College have done is take all of the intel and all of the campaigning material and looked at it and brought YouGov in to, I think, survey 14,000 people, so a massive sample, to try and see what effect the campaign actually had in real terms. And one of the best lines that came out of this was that, and bearing in mind, I believe male suicide is the biggest killer among men under 30, is that before the campaign started, men were far less reluctant, more reluctant rather than women, to talk about their mental health. And by the end of the campaign, both genders were on even footing, so I think about 60% said yes, they now would start a conversation. Equally, some of the more negative stats that appeared were one which struck me particularly, was this notion that when people were asked who would you discuss a mental health problem with first and foremost, I think 68% said friends and family. Further down the line you get, GP got 25%, HR at work 2%, which suggested really that if people have a mental health problem, they won't tell anyone at work in an official capacity because they think they'll lose their job. So on one hand, the stigma is eroding as far as it becoming a national conversation. But on the other, I think a number of sectors have a lot of work to do. And Prince William has said that going forward, the foundation will look at the results and they're going to focus on the workplace because that's clearly an area of weakness.
Yeah, I remember when the documentary, just before the anniversary of Diana's death came out, it really did strike me how open they both were talking about it, which was the first time I think I'd seen men of that age really on television being so open. So it has obviously, the statistics would imply, had a really positive effect.
Yeah, I mean, I think they did a great job. I think it was a great campaign and their personal engagement in it obviously really made the difference, and the fact that they were able to discuss these issues so openly was commendable and quite incredible to see that it has had this effect, that it has changed perceptions and it's destigmatized and it's encouraged people who are struggling and suffering to talk about it and get some help. It's remarkable.
Very positive.
I was going to say, I would urge anyone to have a look at the Heads Together website because it's got a load of graphs, and when you say about impact, to actually see a graph, for instance, when Prince William had the conversation with Lady Gaga and the conversations on social media about mental health suddenly spiked like that, and then the documentary that was done on the people who ran the marathon. There's just loads of very interesting figures, so I'd urge people to have a look into it further because it's quite enlightening. Yeah,
absolutely. Sticking with the royals, slightly different. Mail on Sunday, Charles lobbied the Prime Minister in secret hunt letter. Tell us more, Camilla.
Well, another Black Spider memo shock in that Charles has done some secret lobbying. In a way, this kind of feels like a case of déjà vu, because this is a letter that's been unearthed from 2002 with Prince Charles, a man who's made no secret of his hunting past, complaining about the notion that hunting might be banned. But again, I suppose it begs the question, what kind of king will he be? Will he be able to continue to meddle? Probably not.
Will people agree with him that it's an eco-friendly and romantic sport?
Well, make your own mind up.
Not so much now.
By reading the Mail, eh? Let's look at the front page, Rachel. You've chosen the front page of the Telegraph, right down at the bottom corner. It's what we were talking about before the break. Crunch time for popcorn. What's happening with popcorn?
It has replaced boiled sweets as the enemy of dentists, who are saying that because we consume so much more popcorn now, because it's it's available in so many more flavours, and it's become really, really popular, it has now become, the evil for our teeth. Over the past 3 years, the number of popcorn-related problems has gone from 5% of cases to 1 in 10. So dentists are not happy.
I mean, I've done it a few times in the cinema. You crack down on one of those kernels.
Yeah.
It's not a nice feeling, is it?
No.
Ever happened to you? Ever been to the dentist for it?
Not for the dentist, but that awful moment where you put your hand in the popcorn and it's just the hard, weird stuff at the end and none of the actual...
Just a load of that and salt.
Yeah, and you put a mouthful in. But the other thing about popcorn is this need to eat it literally very, very quickly.
There's something very compulsive about it.
I was going to say, Camilla, you only really get the pile of kernels when you've devoured the whole super size at the cinema.
Like you're assuming that it was supersized, which
They're
is
always
true.
supersized.
Before the trailers have even ended. That's the bad thing as well.
Indeed. So watch yourselves when you're eating popcorn. Rachel, Camilla, thank you. You'll be back with us in the next hour and we'll talk a lot more about Brexit. Yay. Let's see what the weather's got in store in the meantime.